TRADCAST Express. TRADCAST Express, it's Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. Vatican overturns own decision on seminary dean. That's the title of a news article by A.C. Wimmer for Catholic News Agency published on May 17th. Quote, in a significant reversal, the Vatican approved the appointment of a new dean at a seminary in northern Italy, almost 1 year after first blocking the appointment over the candidate's published views on sexual morality, unquote. The person in question is the Reverend Martin M. Lindner, OSM, an Italian theologian who since 2009 has been teaching moral theology, or as it turns out, immoral theology, at the Philosophical Theological College of Brixen. Last year, in late June, mere days before Francis would appoint Victor Manuel Fernandez as his doctrinal undertaker, the Vatican refused to allow Lindner to become the seminary's dean, quote, over his published works on Catholic sexual morality, particularly his views on same-sex blessings, unquote. Ironically, though, these published views did not prevent him from being allowed to teach moral theology there. It only prevented him from becoming the seminary's dean. Does that make much sense? Of course not. And considering that the Vatican itself has now, shall we say, adjusted its own views on same-sex blessings so that they align a little more now with Lindner's, the decision was reversed and Lindner given the green light to become dean after all. Wimmer writes further, quote, on the news of his appointment, Lindner told German media that the appointment of a new prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Victor Fernandez, had played a role. He also asserted that his case, the reversal of such an appointment, was setting a kind of precedent, unquote. Yeah, see, under Pope Francis, anything is reversible, even the Ten Commandments, which he's pretty much reduced to the status of 10 suggestions. The only thing that's not reversible for Francis? Why, his own revolutionary reforms, of course. In other words, his reversals can't be reversed. His Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, said as much, quote, precisely because it is the action of the Spirit, there can be no U-turn, unquote. He assured people during a book presentation on April 24th, as reported by Vatican News. And let's be honest, who could disagree that it is indeed the action of at least some spirit? In other news, here's a headline that'll make you laugh. Pope Francis, priests should preach clearly and briefly. Yeah, well, that is the title of a report published today by the English edition of the German Novus Ordo news portal katholisch.de. The article goes on, quote, ministers should keep their sermons understandable, appealing, and short. The Pope addressed this admonition to priests on Wednesday during the general audience in St. Peter's Square. Several hundred priests and bishops were among the tens of thousands of faithful in attendance. A good sermon, the Pope said, deviating from his manuscript, must address 3 levels: people's thoughts, hearts, and actions. And it should not last longer than 8 minutes. He said this with regard to those priests who often talk so much without people understanding what they are talking about, unquote. Yeah, no kidding. Except that's coming from a guy who talks about, relational veracity, time being greater than space, and religion being an immanent transcendence. Even to kids, he talks about things that are totally meaningful to them, like moving forward, identity, dialogue, people who are closed, and God always giving us newness. Just saying. Anyway, that was today. Yesterday, the same fake pope met once again with Novus Ordo priests from the Diocese of Rome, his diocese. Or, well, at least he tried to. See, 500 were invited, but only 130 bothered to show up, according to a report published by the Italian Seminary Non Possum blog. Yeah, looks like most didn't care to sit through another papal tongue-lashing, which is exactly what those priests who did attend got. Now, the Diocese of Rome pointed out that a lot of priests are involved with summer activities at their parishes currently, and no doubt that accounts for some of the low attendance, but then it does also say something about priorities. Participate in a direct audience with the supposed Vicar of Christ, not exactly an everyday opportunity, or help get the annual summer camp going. Now, there was one courageous presbyter at the meeting who addressed Francis and asked him if he could maybe speak a little more positively about the priesthood. You know, instead of just constantly denouncing clericalism like a madman, maybe he could speak about the beauty of being a priest, and perhaps that might even encourage a vocation or two. Imagine that. Interestingly enough, as Seminary Non Possum reports, this petition, quote, triggered applause that was far warmer than the applause that greeted the Pope in the hall, unquote. And yes, he did it again. Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, did it again. You may remember that there was a big kerfuffle 2 weeks ago about Francis having used in a private meeting a derogatory term in reference to sodomites, a term with a double G in it and beginning with the letters F.A. Well, he used the Italian equivalent of it, of course, not the English word. He said that such people should not be admitted to seminary. Then the Vatican issued an apology, and some were speculating that the Holy Father probably didn't know what the word meant, since Italian isn't his native language, and all that. But Francis has a history of using foul language even in his native Spanish, going back to his days in Argentina. And in fact, it was reported in the mainstream Novus Ordo press in Austria back in 2013, right after his election, that as a young cleric, Bergoglio taught swear words to his own godson, who was also his nephew. Who revealed that? His very own sister did. Maria Elena Bergoglio, who it appears is still alive even today. A link to that can be found in the show notes. In any case, in yesterday's meeting with Roman priests, Francis repeated the very same word again, the one with a double G, thus proving that he's doing so knowingly and deliberately. Why? Probably simply to stir up controversy. We know he's been doing all he can to facilitate the advance of the sodomite lobby in the Vatican II Church, so he's certainly not opposed to these people. In fact, shortly after that story broke, last week, no, actually 2 weeks ago, he replied by means of a handwritten note to a young man who had written to him complaining that he'd been dismissed from seminary over his homosexuality. Francis responded, assuring him that he should go ahead with his vocation because Jesus calls everyone. So, after that interesting turnabout, it is even more interesting that Francis basically repeated the same thing again yesterday. No sodomites in seminaries. But relax, Bergoglio wouldn't be Bergoglio if he hadn't also made sure that he would give a boost to the LGBTQXYZ lobby at the very same time. And so, what do you know? Today, the Jesuit hellboy James Martin posted the following on Twitter, or X. Quote, I was honored to meet with Pope Francis for an hour-long conversation today at Casa Santa Marta. With his permission to share this, the Holy Father said he has known many good, holy, and celibate seminarians and priests with homosexual tendencies. Once again, he confirmed my ministry with LGBTQ people and showed his openness and love for the LGBTQ community. It was also a great joy to receive his blessing on the 25th anniversary of my ordination to the priesthood, unquote. And he included a picture of Francis giving him a blessing. Martin has plenty of direct and indirect endorsements from the false pope. One of the latest is Francis having written the foreword to the Italian edition of his book, Come Forth. So, what's going on with Francis? Is he losing it? Is he going senile? Not at all. Sending mixed signals has long been a favorite tactic of Jorge Bergoglio. He uses it in order to create deliberate tension and confusion, and to keep people guessing about what he really thinks and what he plans to do. He wants to be unpredictable, and it seems he's been rather successful in that. I can't remember now where I read it, but someone who's in the know has said that if Francis plans to do something and it gets leaked ahead of time, he will deliberately change his plan and do the opposite just to confound those who thought they knew what he was going to do. Back in 2013, shortly after Bergoglio's election, an Argentinian gentleman by the name of Omar Bello published the book El Verdadero Francisco, The Real Francis. Here's what historian Henry Sear, using the pseudonym Marc Antonio Colonna, wrote in his 2017 book, The Dictator Pope, about Omar Bello. Quote, "Perhaps the most penetrating study of his personality, Bergoglio's personality, was the one that was published by Omar Bello, El Verdadero Francisco, The Real Francis, within a few months of his election as Pope. It is worth mentioning that this book vanished from the bookshops with unaccountable speed and is now unobtainable, a fate suffered by some other publications that were not favorable to Pope Francis. Omar Bello was a public relations executive who in 2005 was engaged to launch a new church television channel which President Menem had gifted to the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires, and over 8 years he was to work for the Archbishop and get to know him. As a professional in the field himself, Bello was quick to detect in Cardinal Bergoglio an accomplished self-promoter, disguised behind an image of simplicity and austerity. Bello moved in the circles of the archiepiscopal staff and got to hear the many stories that circulated about their enigmatic superior." Unquote. Now, by God's grace, we were able to obtain a copy of that book years ago already, and there's an interesting anecdote Bello shares that I'd like to quote from. It's found on pages 36 and 37, and here we're using our own translation. Quote, "You have to throw him out now," Bergoglio demanded, raising his voice. The walls trembled. "Not one more day can this guy be here. Do you understand?" He was referring to an employee of the Curia whom he couldn't stand. "Right away. Do you understand?" "But he's going to want to talk to you," one of the treasurers replied. "I said to throw him out already. What language am I speaking?" "All right, Monsignor, we'll throw him out right away." Promoting to remove is one of the most respected unwritten slogans of the Church. It sounds strange, but someone who behaves badly can end up in a better position, yes, very far from the original place where he committed the offense. Of course, despite the motto, it is sometimes necessary to throw people out, and in those cases, Bergoglio doesn't abandon his tricks either. Once dismissed, the employee in question requested an audience with the cardinal, and it was granted quickly, without asking questions. "But I did not know anything about it, son. You surprised me," the present-day Pope assured the dismissed employee when he told him of his troubles. "Why did they throw you out? Who was it?" The man left the cardinal's offices without a job, but with a brand new car as a gift, believing Francis to be a saint driven by circumstances beyond his control, dominated by a host of malicious assistants. The story of this dismissal is repeated even by the security officers of the Curia of Buenos Aires. Unquote. Now, clearly, Francis behaves the way he does for reasons of power and pride. He wants to be an enigma to everyone. The less predictable he is, the more control he has over others. But I think there's another reason he wants confusion and tension and controversy, one that doesn't so much concern his own person. He does appear to be a Marxist, after all, and Marxists believe that tension, struggle, and strife are a necessary condition for progress, for revolution, or as Francis would say, for moving forward. Like on blessings for sodomite couples, for example. Just ask Hellboy James Martin, S.J., or the Reverend Martin Lindner. TRADCAST Express is a production of Novus Ordo Watch. Check us out at tradcast.org, and if you like what we're doing, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution at novusordowatch.org/donate.